players smile at.
But Michael Jordan is not only the best basketball player, but he's the most exciting basketball player to ever play.
Tatum fires away, pumps it in, 51 for Jason Tatum.
The Big Three NBA podcast is powered by Prize Picks and the Game Time app.
Hello, folks, and welcome to another edition of the Big Three NBA podcast. I'm Sherrod Blakely, and I'm joined by my CLNS Media Network brother, Bobby Manning. What's going on, Bobby?
What's going on, Sherrod? Man, what a week. I actually just tweeted right before we got on here. 1 week ago today, Celtics won game 3. They were up by 30 in that game. They're within 2-1, and it seemed like everything was going to be okay. And now here we are a week later, and we have the news we have, that the season's over, everyone's hurt, now the future's in complete flux.
Yeah, it's amazing how quickly the tide will turn when it seems like there's just nothing happening that could possibly make this well laid out plan go awry. But needless to say, things are going awry. Before we jump into the podcast here, I want to remind folks that they are listening to the Big Three NBA podcast, which is part of the CLNS Media Network, which is where you will find the Big Three NBA podcast past and present episodes. In addition, there's a ton of other Celtics content out there, many of it being produced by our good friend Bobby Manning, such as one of the main voices on the Garden Report, which goes live immediately after every Celtics game, which we don't have any for a while. Home or away, win or lose, the Celtics, the Garden Report is on the scene. So if you're into the Boston Celtics and all that's happening with them, and certainly there's going to be a lot happening this offseason, CLNS Media Network is the place to be. Bobby, there's so many places to start. I'm just going to start where that's just kind of been on my mind really most of today, and that's Jaylen Brown. The report out about Jaylen having reportedly has a torn meniscus, have not determined whether it will need to be surgically repaired. It just felt that news, one, it kind of explained why Jaylen just didn't seem like Jaylen. But also it just adds more misery to what has just been an absolutely miserable stretch here for the Boston Celtics. What are your thoughts on Jaylen and this meniscus injury, and just what does that mean to the Celtics?
It's interesting, and it's definitely a surprise, right? Because we didn't think there was structural damage here. He said after round 1 there's no structural damage, and he felt like he was turning the corner toward 100% potentially. I was dubious of the 100% thing because I didn't think that was possible, especially after the comments late in the year about him just having to play through this and him having to learn how to figure it out. But the structural damage thing, I thought that was great news. I thought it was a pleasant surprise, because I did start to think, when we saw how disruptive this became late in the year, that this could be some damage, that this could be something that requires surgery after the season finished. And so I guess unless something changed in the second round, he just wasn't truthful or wanted to send an optimistic message out ahead of round 2 and show that he's not damaged to their opponents. I don't know what he was trying to do there, but you never love to hear meniscus. And I know it's a partial tear. I was talking to some people today. It's not always a guarantee that you have to have surgery on a partial tear. You can treat it with, plasma-rich platelets and other shots and other treatments. So I don't think it's a slam dunk that he's getting surgery, but if he does, you're looking at a couple different things with meniscus. Obviously, you could try to do a full repair. That takes longer. You could try to do the removal of the tear, which is always a concerning surgery to go through, as we saw with Rob Williams a couple years ago and numerous players throughout NBA history. So, yeah, I don't love that. Maybe I went a little far today calling it devastating, but that was the first thing that popped into my mind. Is it didn't look good all year. It was a concern throughout much of the late stages of the season, but you didn't think he was actually significantly hurt until today. Right. And that's tough in tandem with the Tatum news here.
Yeah. And I think, Bobby, devastating, maybe not the injury itself devastating, but I think it is devastating to the concerns that Celtics fan that everything's going to be okay. There aren't a lot of signs pointing that things are going to be okay for the Celtics. They've got, as you pointed out, you've got his injury. You've got Jason Tatum with the season-ending, injury that he suffered. And those are just the bumps and bruises that we know about. Most every player in the NBA, once their season finally ends, usually, there's some types of bumps and bruises that they have to take care of, whether it's, getting rest, which is best case scenario, or whether there's some type of procedural, thing that has to take place. But the one thing, Bobby, that it just feels it's an inevitable aspect of this team is that there's going to be notable change. Maybe not significant, but notable nonetheless. And I'm just curious your thoughts on how Jaylen Brown's situation now, what kind of impact do you think that will have on some of those high-level conversations that Brad Stevens is certainly going to be having with lots of teams involving lots of different Celtics players?
Well, it stems off the conversation we've had since Tatum got hurt, which is without Tatum this year, you're probably in a better position to think for the long term. And I think that goes with Jaylen's treatment here, too. If there is something longer term that's going to set him up for a better career looking forward, it's probably not a bad idea to go down that route. And I'm sure he wants to be available for the start of next year. I'm sure he wants to play as much as he can. But the smart thing for this team to do right now is what's in the best long-term interest of them. And, I looked at Jaylen after this injury here, and there's going to be some legitimate conversation about whether or not you take calls on a guy like that just to see what you could potentially get. I didn't love the idea because I feel like he can be a stabilizing force for them through this tough year that's ahead here. And that I don't think it's a bad idea, or that I do think it's a bad idea to sink to the bottom, something like this. I think it's hard to get yourself up from that. I think it's hard to find another Jaylen Brown caliber player to lead your franchise. If you do move on from someone like him, even for an intriguing return, which I'm sure there would be some out there. So I'm against moving on from Jaylen into next year. If they want to see all available possibilities here, I can't blame them. But I'm generally against that route of attack here. Now, if he's going to be out at the start of the next year, which, again, I don't have any indication that's the case right now, you do start to have a tougher conversation about, is this year going to be a little bit of a step back? Because as you saw the other night, don't think you're going to have enough when he's not himself, or if he's not available at all. And now, we'll get to it later, I'm sure, but you think of Al Horford, another stabilizing piece, potentially not being back here. This thing could get dark fast if they continue to lose pieces off this puzzle that they had in front of them a week ago. And right now, between the Jaylen news and between Al's comments today, you're already starting to worry about those two guys and their availability or, presence on this roster at all at the start of next year.
Yeah, and we'll definitely get into Allen a little bit, but before we do that, I wanted to just kind of take a quick sneak peek back at what just transpired in the Knicks series. Celtics go down in 6 games to New York Knicks, who, it seemed that as the series went along, the Knicks got a little bit stronger, a little bit more confident, felt a little bit more at ease that they could take this thing. And they were, at the very end, I mean, the Celtics were dominated by a team unlike we've rarely seen before. I believe the margin of victory was the largest victory a team had in closing out a defending NBA champion ever in NBA history, which is not a stretch to think that that's a record. So I guess my question to you, Bobby, is just what concerns you most about that Knicks series, and not just that game where the Celtics got absolutely smashed, but the series in its totality. What are some of the concerns that you have for the Celtics going forward after just that absolute total dismantling that the Knicks put on them in Game 6? And really just the way they were able to show different sides of the ability to take out the Celtics throughout that series.
Yeah, a lot of concerns there, but so many of them are in the past now, right? It was a lost opportunity, and I think that was the feeling from a lot of these guys here, is that they were up in these games. You should have had at least one of game 1 and 2. If you blow one of those games, it's probably less impactful there. But to do both, just devastating. And, going forward, I do think with the Brown aspect in particular, I was thrilled by the way you played in Game 5. Now you're thinking of life after Tatum. I think it showed, again, what I'm talking about here, that stabilizing presence he could potentially be for them next season. But when you're in that role and when you're going to lead a team, and that's something he's always expressed confidence in doing, maybe even a desire to do. So that's a cool thing I think is a possibility next year, is that he'll actually get the chance to do that. but you have to show up every night, and you have to be great every night. You have to lead every night. And so game 5's great, 12 assists, all the scoring, all the baskets he made. He got them through that elimination game, and it was a stellar performance. And then 2 nights later, the jumping up in the air and passing to no one at the last minute after bailing out on a shot, that bizarre play in the corner where he just lets Robinson run out on him and turns the ball over after having a wide open 3 in the corner. Then generally playing out of control the rest of the game, dribbling off his foot out of bounds. 7 turnovers in this game for him. Obviously, unfortunately, reminiscent of that game 7 against Miami a couple of years ago.
Right.
This was a rough one for him. And I think that's the big picture thing you take from this one is the question of whether he can carry you through next year and you can still have a great season with him leading at the helm. I think you can. And again, I lean in that direction of believing in Jaylen and trying to see if he can lead you through this next season. But that inconsistency factor there, especially with the ball control, is concerning. And, he's dealing with an injury here, and I'm sure that played some role in some of the struggles we saw from him during the postseason. But this is on him now. Like, this is what he wanted. This is the responsibility he's prepared himself for. And they're going to be looking to him, I think. Something might surprise me this summer. Maybe something pops up that we're not imagining here. Maybe he won't be ready for the start of next season with whatever treatment he goes with here. But that's it, Sherrod, right? When you're the leader of the team, you have to be present, effective, and consistent night to night.
Yeah. And we've seen that in Tatum. Even when Tatum does put up pretty consistent numbers. I mean, Tatum basically rolls out of bed and can get you 25 points. And he's still, he deals with his share of criticism, even when he's producing at a statistically speaking, a high level. But when you look at a lot of the issues that the Celtics endured, particularly the last couple of games, where you didn't have your best scorer, you didn't have the guy that, you've been counting on. How do you bake in Tatum's absence into your concerns about this team? I mean, how much do you attribute those struggles, the Celtics' inability to be the Celtics, if you will, to not having Jason Tatum those last couple games?
By the time he goes down, it's 3-1.
Yeah.
You're down 9 in that game. I don't think you're coming back whether he gets hurt or not. So you already squandered a third double-digit lead in that series. And Sherrod, they were at 90% win probability in all 3 of their losses up to that point. And then obviously the fourth is one of the more massive blowouts we've seen. So yeah, I don't think it changes your thoughts on this series all that much. I get the concern for him and the compassion for him in this moment. You're not going to beat him while he's down, but he contributed to the first 2 losses and with the shot selection, with the way he managed those leads. I don't think he was great for a lot of this series, struggled to create separation. Maybe he was already starting to feel the effects of what was coming there with the Achilles tear leading up to that, because I thought it was pretty stunning how little separation he could create off the dribble. Maybe that was his wrist. I don't know, but he just could not get to the paint in this series. And I think that led to him settling as much as we watched from him. So yeah, I don't think you look back on this series and say, oh, if Tatum was healthy, this goes another way. That's possible. Maybe they do come back down 3-1 in that circumstance. But to me, the story of this series was written before he even went down. That was just unfortunately the exclamation point at the end that made it hurt even more, with the fact that you're not going to have him back for next year. And now these long-term questions with this team become all the more pronounced. That injury to me was a forward-facing issue here, not one where you look back at this series and say, oh, they lost it because Tatum went down.
Yeah, and when you talk about long-term issues and things that they're going to have to grapple with and deal with and just kind of manage, and you touched on a little bit earlier about Al Horford. I want us to kind of dig into that a little bit. Take us through just what was your general takeaway from Al's exit interview with the media?
Yeah, this is a guy who, through himself and through others, I've talked to people around him too over the last couple of years here, has left no doubt about his desire to play as long as he possibly can, as long as he's effective and able. So to hear, and I asked him directly, do you still plan on playing? Do you plan on being back in Boston? Because obviously he's going to be a free agent this summer. And he wouldn't answer. And he got 3 questions about it today. I've said the same thing pretty much to all of them, that he's got to assess, what they just went through, speak with his family, figure things out. A lot was still fresh off a devastating loss. And so he was not committed either to continuing the play or remaining in Boston. And I don't think the difference between those two really matters all that much to the Celtics. Maybe he wants to continue playing in the best possible situation where he can win at this point in his career. Or maybe you're looking to get the most money you possibly can while you're still effective. It could be any one of those three things. But to me, it showed a marked change in direction from where we were before this Tatum injury. And he and Tatum are so close. Right. I think you obviously look at Tatum as being the guy who makes you a championship contender. And when you lose that, there was just a look in his face at MSG that night that Tatum went down that was so emotional, so distraught, and so shocked. And so a couple of days later, you lose the series. You're going into this stage of your career here. Do you have second thoughts about continuing play? Do you look at it and say, is this worth it if we're not going to be a championship contender here? Now, Pritchard talked, Hauser talked as well. Those guys were adamant that they need him back, that they want to see the team do everything they can to get him back. And who knows, Jason Glushon is Al Horford's agent. He's gotten a lot of money over the Celtics, over the years. So, I remember an ESPN article a week or two ago setting the stages for the Horford negotiations a little bit. There's been a couple different reports over the last month or so here that say, there's going to be some money for Horford out there in free agency. So maybe all of this, including the press conference today, is setting the stage to put him in an advantageous position for negotiations with the team this summer. But to me, if we're taking it at face value, I think there's a real chance that Horford might not be back on the Celtics next year. And that, on top of everything else we've discussed here, would be a difficult situation to navigate.
Really, it would be. And the thing about Al is that to stay in Boston, he would most likely have to leave some money on the table. Players, I think, can reconcile that with themselves, with their family, with their team, if you're doing that on a championship caliber roster. In their minds, often that's a fair trade-off. I'm going to leave. The team can have, I'm going to earn less than I could, but I'm going to be on a championship caliber contending team. And no Jason Tatum for most of next season, if not all of next season, potentially not having Jaylen Brown to start things, depending on what happens with his health issues. And we'll talk a bit later about your guy, Luke Kornet, who's probably has played his way out of Boston in a good way. He's done so well that he's positioned himself to make a pretty nice payday elsewhere. And if you're Al Horford and you're looking at all these things around you, you got to ask yourself, is it really worth it to you to be here? Because so many of the things that you value, so many of the things that you love about this organization, you're just not going to experience that next year. They're not going to be a title contender if you're beginning the season with no Tatum and potentially no Jaylen Brown. The playoffs, is far from a given. When you look at what you're going to be getting the season with and what some of the other teams most likely are going to have out the gates. So Al Horford, I think he has to think long and hard about truly, whether it's worth it to be back here. And another guy that I think spoke to you guys today was Jrue Holiday, who's in a little bit of a different situation. Jrue is under contract and seems to be happy here. But the Celtics, in their efforts to frankly get that payroll in order, he might become collateral damage in that regard. What did Jrue have to say about just his, just his general thoughts on today in his exit interview?
Yeah, I took 3 things from him. Healthy to close this year. The finger thing healed. Didn't face too many ill effects from the hamstring into this round. I think you saw that too. I thought he was one of the more competitive and effective guys in that Knicks series for the Celtics here. And overall, the whole playoffs, I thought he got back to form and was one of their more important players through their wins in the first 2 rounds. His ability to guard Towns, his ability to guard Paolo, the flexibility on that end is at another level, over even Derek White. But I still look at his price tag here and his game and the age and all the considerations and say he's a little bit of a luxury when you do have a guy like Derek White in the backcourt, when you do have a guy like Peyton Pritchard making $6 million. If you're going to be cutting costs here, the older guard who's probably going in the wrong direction in terms of his trajectory, his career at this point, that's going to be something I think you look to see what you can get for first and foremost this offseason. He said today he wants to be part of this, still thinks that there's a chance this team can win, and he wants to help with that. And it does seem like he has every intention of staying, and he's signed for so long. Is no question in my mind that he's just going to want to be as secure as he can be at this stage. But to me, again, luxury from the start. That was always something I looked at with him, and I think you needed him for that first championship. This year, Sherrod, the availability became a little more sporadic for him. There was a lot more management of his body throughout the year. So I'm glad to hear he got to the finish line feeling all right. But I do think he's probably behind Porzingis, the second most likely player to move if we're stacking up everybody here of all the potential players that they could trade. And it'll be interesting to see how teams around the league view that contract. I think when you look at the percentage of the cap, it's not a huge number. But when you're talking about a player his age who's going to play as many games as he does, which isn't a ton at this stage, I'd imagine 3 more years left at 32, 34, 36 million here is a little bit of a high price for a player like that in this new second apron environment.
Yeah. And really the second apron, it's designed in part to prevent teams from basically having multiple players with these type of contracts long term. It's supposed to create a little bit more movement. And Jrue Holiday certainly is someone who, again, has nothing to do with talent and ability and impact, and everything to do with just bottom line. Are you getting enough bang for your buck when you've got a guy at his age making that kind of money who the minute he shows up for training camp is going to miss a pretty sizable chunk of the season just from a load management standpoint? So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out as the Celtics enter an earlier than expected offseason. For those of you who are listening to the show, we ask that you subscribe to the podcast, like and leave a review. And for those watching the show on CLNS, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the Celtics All Access YouTube channel, where you can find our show and a lot of other great Celtics content. We'll be there. Also, please make sure you turn on your notifications so that you know the instant a new video drops, because I know the video that I know a lot of people on this particular podcast, Bobby Manning, are looking forward to seeing is the Luke Kornet signs blank with blank team, because that video is going to come at some point this summer. And Bobby, we give you a lot of grief about Luke Kornet because, for those who follow the Garden Report, Bobby Manning has been Team Luke from day one. Whenever Luke has a good game, Bobby's like, that's just what I expect. When Luke had that monster Game 5 performance, I was sitting behind Bobby, and I will say this: Bobby remained incredibly composed. There was no fist pumping. There was no, that's my guy. Bobby was a absolute professional in every sense of the word. I was so proud of you, Bobby. I was so proud of you in that moment. But
now, in my mind, might have been a little different.
Exactly. But let's be real, though. Your guy, we kind of laughed at you when you brought up the fact that Luke, $20 million guy. Do you still feel that's a possibility? I mean, I think you probably said it tongue in cheek, but I mean, you're looking at what he does. I mean, is that as crazy now as it may have seemed back, a few months ago?
Well, I always said he was the best third center in the league, right up there. If not, I guess Naz Reid was there at one point.
Reid, yeah.
Naz Reid, Luke Kornet. I think there's big money out there for backup centers potentially here. Now, how big is that? Mid-level, 6, 7, 8 at this point. I think that is the taxpayer. The bigger one's probably over 10 million at this point. So, those are numbers that are going to be tough for the Celtics to compete with if it gets there. He obviously has a level of comfort in Boston that caused him to come back to the Celtics for the minimum on a 1-year deal this year when there were bigger offers, I know that, out there, including one as much as 7 million for a year ago. So, he passed that up to come back and play for a team that was running it back in full. He talked today as well, and I found it interesting that, like Al, he was non-committal to a return and said, we've got to talk to the family and all that stuff. I get that. That's usually the canned response. But, if a guy really wanted to be back and was intent on that and focused on that, I do think you make some stronger indication that that's going to be the case. If you're thinking about potentially leaving or seeing what's out there, you probably don't want to promise that I'll let Kyrie Irving. So,
right.
That stood out to me today. I do think for a guy like him who's never cashed in his career, you have to make a real effort this summer to see if you can, set your family up for life and all of that. I think that's a real thing with him here. Now, I've heard some optimism that the Celtics can get a deal here done, but there's a limited pathway to doing it, and that might involve, a long-term deal where there's a smaller salary number, but a bigger guaranteed number over time. Like, let's say 20 million over 5 years or something like that. And, they can offer more years than other teams here. So I think that's going to be the strength they try to rely on, along with the fact that he knows he fits here and he's effective here and comfortable here. So I do think Luke will be back on a deal like that. I think it's something, if he gets another offer from a team that's, say, 6 for 2 years at 12 or 5 for 20 from the Celtics, that's like 2 or 3 million a year. You're getting more guaranteed money with the Celtics at that point. And I don't know why other teams going to throw in team options or non-guaranteed years at the end of their offers. I think that's probably going to be more what it's like for him out on the open market, because I don't know if you're another team, whether you're willing to go 3-4 guaranteed mid-level years with a guy like him again, when money's going to start being so tight around the league. So, it's a tough call. There are some backup centers around the league who are making big money, over $10 million a year. And we saw him play at that level this year, Sherrod, for a lot of this season. And so, you're looking at that center position. We mentioned Horford. Porzingis yesterday, talking about his illness, no clarity there, how that's going to affect him long term. He's obviously entering the last year of his contract and is a candidate to maybe be part of these cost-cutting efforts. And then you throw Luke into that mix as a free agent here. They have no certainty at center next year. And that's a scary thought alongside everything else we're talking about. Kata, even a non-guaranteed guy who lost his rotation spot through the course of this year. Xavier Tillman, I really want to find Xavier Tillman after yesterday's game and just ask him what the hell happened this year. Because that guy was a part of their rotation a year ago, effective player in the finals. And then from November on this year, we just never saw him again. It was crazy what happened with him.
Yeah. They definitely have, lots of question marks. And I think you're right, Bobby. I think one of the biggest question marks is, what are you going to do at the big position? And remember, we're kind of entering this stage where teams are becoming very comfortable with the double big lineup. Where you've got one big who's kind of a rim protecting big man center, somewhat traditional, and then you got the other one who's a stretch big. And you look at this Knicks team that put them away. Mitchell Robinson is not taking any shots that are more than 5 feet away from the basket. And his defense is definitely better than Karl-Anthony Towns. But Cat gives you that ability to stretch the floor with his 3-point shooting. It's rare to see a guy that big who can shoot as consistently as Karl-Anthony Towns. I think he's on the north side of 40% from 3-point range that he was this past season. And so if you're the Celtics and you're either going to figure out a way to stay with that trend or ride that wave, or you're going to try to something different. And it's unclear what they're going to do. But certainly, the fact that they don't really have any clear definitive paths that they can take to bolster the big man position or positions is a problem. And the other problem, Bobby, that I think is out there, and we kind of touched on it a little bit, didn't really get into it too much, was this team's new core. What is that going to look like? And my question to you, Bobby, is who do you think should be in this Celtics core going forward? And like, who are the top, like, if there are 4 guys, if you can only keep 4 guys, who are the 4 guys that you are going to keep on this Celtics roster for next season?
I think it's pretty clear. Tatum, Brown, Derek White, who's the most complimentary player on the roster and the guy they've missed when he's been out the most, more than anyone else over the last 2 years here. And Peyton Pritchard, who I do believe in stepping into a starting role next year. And we've had some debate. That contract's super valuable. He's a player that could feasibly start elsewhere, and maybe you get something significant back for that if you are going in a different direction here and don't believe in him as one of your starters. But if you are going to move off the veterans like Porzingis and Holiday, it's going to have to be the Pritchards and Kornets stepping up into bigger roles next year. And as encouraging as it was in Game 5 to see what Pritchard and Kornet did there, and for a lot of this postseason, there's also the downside of that, which is what those guys looked like in a Game 6, as well as other spots this postseason where they didn't play as much. So relying on guys like that more if they're willing to grow beyond what they're doing right now, and those are guys who are still have some upward trajectory, I would say, based off what we've seen over the last few years from their growth, that's great. And it could make next year fun. I think Pritchard in particular, not to make the comparison, Sherrod, but with greater opportunity, could he have a breakout season akin to Isaiah Thomas's? Isaiah was the sixth man. He was a smaller guy. Maybe Pritchard's not as physical as him, but the shot making is just out of this world right now. And if he's a starter on this team next year, we've seen what he's done with those starting opportunities. He's been able to put up some monster numbers, at least in the regular season. So that is something I'm excited about for next year.
I will say this about Peyton Pritchard. There may not be a player on this roster who is more confident in themselves, even if they don't have the proofs or the receipts to back that confidence up. I mean, this is a guy that played behind Marcus Smart, Defensive Player of the Year, and Malcolm Brogdon, Sixth Man of the Year, and felt that he should have been out there playing more than him. And really, when it was clear that the Celtics weren't really sure what they're going to do, he said, okay, trade me. People forget that this guy, he was very candid and open and honest about wanting to be traded if they weren't going to play him. And so they said, okay, we got rid of Marcus, we got rid of Malcolm. What are you going to do? And what does he do? He goes out and plays the best basketball of his life. So Peyton's one of those guys that I like that confidence that he plays with. And I do believe that if he were a starter, he would be someone, especially if you don't have Tatum around and you might not have Jaylen early on. A guy that is we're going to find out just what he's made of, because he's going to be the one guy that, one, is going to play, two, has the green light to shoot, and three, has ridiculous swag and confidence that he can be an impact player.
Right. So, did you hear him today? He was so confident about their ability to compete next year. If you want some confidence going into next year after all the doom and gloom, you should listen to Pritchard today. He was certain that they're going to compete.
He's one of those guys that, look, when you are in a bunker and you've got bombs going off all around you and nothing is going your way, you want Peyton Pritchard in that bunker with you, because you know that his confidence is going to absolutely seep its way into the rest of the team. To me, he's the kind of leader that this team, I think the transition that they're kind of going through now, from championship caliber team to recalibrating who they are, you're going to need players like Peyton Pritchard, not only in terms of what he can do in terms of his actual play, but just his persona and his presence inside that locker room and inside those lines when things aren't going to go great for this team. They're going to need someone who has a certain confidence and who can play. And Peyton, he checks off both of those boxes without a doubt. So, before we get out of here, for those of you listening to the show, we ask that you subscribe to the podcast, like, and leave a review. And for those watching the show on CLNS, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to CLNS Media and Celtics All Access YouTube channel, where you can find our show and a lot of other great Celtics content. And please make sure you turn your notifications on so you know that the instant a new video drops. Hey, Bobby, you got anything coming down the pipeline soon that people need to know about?
Nothing new, but still some good recap content over on CLNSmedia.com for the Tatum warriors out there. We did a lot of interviews with different doctors and stuff over there as well. And on our YouTube channel, we have an interview with one of them that I think is encouraging, with the potential that he got a speed bridge procedure here, which could reduce the amount of time needed to come back from an Achilles tear. I don't think we've seen that in many basketball players, but the doctor who performed the surgery on him does do those procedures. So it's a possibility here, and definitely one that could make this not as severe as it looked in terms of time missed here. And you obviously already have his father saying 8 to 9 months as well, which is probably about the best guess, you would say, with something like this. So yeah, we got some of that over there. And we're always podcasting on the Garden Report as well. We're still going to have a lot of content coming out over on the CLNS Media channel.
Yeah, well, again, any and all positive signs, images, ideas, concepts around Jason Tatum, Celtics fans will absolutely gobble that up, because they could sure use a lot of that and then some right now.
I love that he went to KD's doctor, Sherrod. Like, what better message could you send that this is going to be all right?
Exactly, and that's the poster child for how do you bounce back from Achilles and be as good, if not better. So, yeah, absolutely. Well, again, this is the Big 3 NBA podcast. This is Sherrod Blakely, and for me, the rest of the crew, Bobby Manning, we're out. Take care, folks.